Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to close our eyes and drift back to the American West of the late 1800s. Picture it now. A vast, rolling prairie under an impossibly big sky. A lone figure on horseback rides into the sunset. It's romantic, isn't it? A time of freedom, adventure, and rugged individualism. Except it wasn't really like that at all. It was dirty, difficult, and profoundly uncomfortable. And the quiet truth is, you probably wouldn't survive a day. And tonight, we're going to find out why. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always like to see that. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get going tonight. The first thing you become aware of is the cold. It's a deep, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the very ground beneath you. It has wormed its way through your thin, coarse wool blanket, past your worn-out long johns, and has settled deep into your bones. There's no alarm clock, no gentle chiming from your phone. Your wake-up call is a primal shiver, a convulsive little tremor that racks your body and tells you that staying still any longer is no longer an option. You fight to keep your eyes closed, to cling to the last frayed threads of a dream, but it's no use. The cold is a relentless bully, and it has won. Your eyelids flutter open. There is no gentle dawn light. Instead, you see darkness. Or almost darkness. A faint, watery gray light seeps through a single, small opening in the wall. Near your head, an opening that serves as your only window. It's barely larger than a book. It isn't glass, of course. Glass was a luxury you couldn't afford or transport. It's a piece of greased paper stretched thin and tacked to a crude wooden frame. The light it lets in is milky and vague, doing little more than transforming the pitch black into a murky gloom. You take a breath and the air bites the back of your throat. It tastes of damp earth, stale smoke, and the faint, ever-present odor of unwashed humanity, mostly yours. You lie still for another moment, trying to gather the will to move. Your bed is not a bed. It's a shallow wooden frame with ropes crisscrossed over it, upon which rests a canvas sack filled with lumpy, rustling straw. Or maybe just hay. Whatever it is, it has compressed into uncomfortable lumps and valleys over the last few months. And you're pretty sure something small and many-legged is sharing it with you. Your current thread count, you think with a sleepy, sarcastic sigh, is approximately 1, and maybe a half if you count the spider. You push yourself up onto your elbows, the straw crackling and shifting beneath you. A small cascade of dirt and dried grass crumbles from the ceiling above and patters down onto your blanket. There's no 5-second rule here. The floor is dirt, the walls are dirt, the roof is dirt. Everything is dirt. Welcome to your home. It's called a soddy, short for sod house. It's the primary reason you have any shelter at all. You're here because of the Homestead Act of 1862, a landmark piece of legislation that promised 160 acres of federal land to anyone who would settle it and improve it for 5 years. It sounded like a dream back east, a chance to own your own piece of America. So you came. You and hundreds of thousands like you poured onto the Great Plains, a land of endless grass but precious few trees. And so, without lumber, you built your house from the only material available in abundance, the prairie itself. You sliced the earth into thick, grass-heavy bricks and stacked them one on top of another. It's an ingenious bit of pioneer engineering, really. The thick walls, often 2 or 3 feet deep, keep you surprisingly cool in the blistering summer and, well, they keep you less frozen in the winter. The sounds of the morning begin to register. It's not a chirping bird or the hum of a distant highway. It's the ceaseless, mournful whine of the wind as it scours the vast, empty landscape outside. It's a sound that never, ever stops. It pries at the corners of your little home, seeking out every tiny crack to send in another tendril of icy air or a fine dusting of prairie soil. Then there are the other sounds. The frantic, scrabbling scratch of a mouse in the walls, the lowing of your single precious cow somewhere nearby, The soft rustle of your family, or perhaps other ranch hands if you're in a bunkhouse, beginning to stir in the same small, cramped room. Privacy is a concept for the rich and the city dwellers. Here, life is a communal affair, whether you like your companions or not. You swing your legs out of the bunk, and your bare feet meet the hard-packed dirt floor. The shock of the cold is immediate and absolute. It shoots up your calves and makes your teeth ache. There is no fumbling for slippers. You don't own slippers. You reach for your pants, which you left folded on a small wooden crate beside your bed. They are stiff with dirt and wear, made of a heavy, unforgiving wool. As you pull them on, you can feel the grit embedded in the fabric, scratching against your skin. You can't remember the last time any of your clothes felt truly clean. The psychological toll of this existence is something people back in the cities couldn't possibly fathom. In fact, historians still debate the true psychological impact of the sheer isolation and sensory deprivation experienced by so many prairie settlers. Weeks could go by without seeing another human being outside your immediate family. The endless grass and the oppressive sky could, and often did, weigh heavily on the mind. Looking around your one-room existence, you can just make out the shapes of your world. A small pot-bellied stove in the corner, its ashes cold and gray, a rough-hewn table with 2 benches, a collection of iron pots and tin plates. That's it. That is the sum total of your material world. There are no pictures on the wall. What would you hang them on? The walls are, after all, just dirt and roots. An odd but true fact about living in a soddy was that the walls and ceiling were often alive. In the spring, wildflowers would sometimes sprout directly from the roof, and it wasn't unheard of for a small, confused garter snake to slither out from a crack in the wall looking for a bit of sun. Just another house guest you have to get used to. You wouldn't want to hit the snooze button, even if you had one. The rooster outside is your only clock, and he doesn't have a 9-minute timer. The day has begun, and just waking up has already been an ordeal. You stumble toward the door, your stiff wool pants scratching against your legs with every step. The first, most pressing need of the morning is not food or warmth, but a trip to the necessary. You pull your boots on, not even bothering to sit down. They are caked with dried mud and something you hope is just more mud. Lacing them up is a clumsy affair in the semi-darkness, your fingers still numb and stiff with cold. There are no cozy bathroom slippers here, no heated tile floors. The journey to the privy is a journey you must prepare for. You grab a heavy coat from a wooden peg by the door, a shapeless, greasy garment that smells faintly of lanolin and wood smoke. Pushing the heavy plank door open, you're hit with a blast of wind that feels like a physical slap to the face. The world outside is a canvas of muted grays and browns, the sky a vast, indifferent dome. And there, about 50 yards from the soddy, is your destination. A small, solitary wooden structure leaning just slightly to the east, as if tired of fighting the incessant wind. The walk is a small misery in itself. The ground is frozen solid and uneven, and you have to watch your step to avoid twisting an ankle. The cold seeps up through the soles of your worn boots, and the wind tries its best to tear the coat from your shoulders. 50 yards doesn't seem like much, but in this bitter cold, it feels like a mile. This strategic distance is, of course, intentional. You want it far enough away to mitigate the smell, but close enough to make it in a blizzard or a rainstorm. It's a delicate calculation of olfactory offense versus the risk of freezing to death on a simple trip to the loo. You finally reach the small shack. The door is a simple plank with a leather hinge and a small carved moon, a symbol whose origins surprisingly have little to do with literacy. In colonial times, the crescent moon was an ancient symbol for womankind, while the star or sunburst often marked the men's. Over time, the moon simply became the generic symbol for the outhouse. You pull open the door, which groans in protest. The smell hits you first. It's an eye-watering, throat-catching combination of freezing air and raw human waste, a scent for which there is no modern equivalent. Inside, it's even colder than it was outside. the thin planks offering no insulation, only a visual barrier. The seat is a rough-cut board with a hole in it, and you can see a terrifying number of splinters just waiting for an unfortunate encounter. There is no toilet paper. You might have a small stack of old newspapers or pages from a Sears and Roebuck catalog, but it's more likely you have a corn cob. Yes, a dried corn cob. It's effective, biodegradable, and, one imagines, monumentally uncomfortable. As you sit there, the wind whistles up from the pit below, a chillingly intimate draft that serves as nature's own bidet, and not in a pleasant Parisian way. This is not a place for lingering, for checking your phone, or for quiet contemplation. The goal is efficiency. Get in, do what you must, and get out before any part of you freezes to the seat. Having survived the ordeal, you trudge back to the relative warmth of the Saudi, your mind now turning to the second phase of your morning routine, getting clean. Tucked in a corner near the stove is the washstand. It's little more than a small, rickety table holding a large ceramic basin and a pitcher of water. You pick up the pitcher. It's heavy, and the water within is numbingly cold. There's a thin skim of ice on the top that you have to break with your thumb. This water was hauled by bucket from a well or a creek the evening before. Pouring some into the basin, the splash echoes loudly in the quiet room. Now for the soap. It's a yellowish, formidable-looking block sitting in a small tin dish. This isn't your artisanal lavender-scented soap. This is lye soap, homemade from rendered animal fat and wood ash. It's harsh, powerfully alkaline stuff, great for cutting through axle grease or laundry stains, but less great for your skin. It leaves your hands feeling tight, dry, and vaguely sticky. You splash the freezing water onto your face. It's a shocking, breathtaking experience that accomplishes the goal of waking you up more effectively than any shot of espresso. You scrub your face and hands with the lye soap, working up a meager lather before splashing again to rinse. The towel hanging on a nail next to the stand is a single communal piece of rough linen, already damp from the last person who used it. The modern understanding of hygiene is utterly absent here. The work of Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister on germ theory is still brand new. Intellectual speak for doctors in faraway European cities. The idea that invisible microbes cause disease is a concept that has not yet trickled down to the prairie. To you, dirt is just dirt. A little of it won't kill you, or so you think. Historians still debate the cleanliness of frontier folk. Some argue they were unbothered by grime, while others point out they were simply acting according to the knowledge and resources they had, where conserving water and fuel for heating was a far higher priority than a daily bath. What about your teeth? You might own a toothbrush, a recent invention with a bone handle and boar bristle head, but it's just as likely you don't. Your dental hygiene consists of rubbing your teeth with a rough cloth, dipped in a bit of salt or soot from the stove. There were commercial tooth powders available by mail order, but they were a luxury, an odd but true fact. Many early tooth powders contained surprisingly abrasive and sometimes harmful ingredients, including chalk, pulverized charcoal, and even crushed brick, all meant to scour stains away at the expense of your enamel. You give your teeth a quick scrub with your finger and a bit of salt, rinse with a swig of the icy water, and spit it into the basin. Your morning breath, you reason, could probably knock a buzzard off a fence post, but then again, so could everyone else's. It's the great equalizer. That basin of murky, soapy water won't be thrown out. Oh no, water is too precious, especially if you had to haul it a long way. The next person in your family will use it, and the person after that. Only when it's truly opaque with grime will it be tossed out the door onto the thirsty ground. Sharing in this world is a non-negotiable part of survival, even if it means sharing gray water. You run your fingers through your tangled, unwashed hair, picking out a bit of straw from the night. You're as clean as you're going to get for the next 12 hours. You feel cold, your skin is tight and itchy from the harsh soap, and the phantom sensation of splinters still lingers. But you've answered nature's call and washed your face. It's time for breakfast. Now that you're awake and, well, you've performed the morning's basic ablutions, your stomach starts to make its presence known. It's not a gentle grumble for a croissant and a latte. It's a hollow, demanding ache. You turn your attention to the pot-bellied stove, the cast-iron heart of your small home. Someone, probably your mother or father, or maybe the designated camp cook, is already moving about, stoking the embers from last night back to life. You add a few precious pieces of wood to the small firebox, or more likely, a few dried cow patties. Yes, prairie coal, as they called it, was the fuel of choice for much of the plains. Buffalo chips and cow chips were plentiful, free for the collecting, and burned with a surprising slow heat. They were also, you can't help but notice, made of dung, and their particular smoky aroma infuses everything you own, including the food you're about to eat. It's not the cozy smell of a wood-burning hearth. It's more agricultural. Soon, a large, heavy coffee pot is placed on the stovetop. But what's inside isn't the rich, dark roast Arabica you might be craving. Coffee beans were expensive, a luxury to be savored. Your daily brew is a different beast altogether. It's made from chicory, a woody perennial plant whose roots, when roasted and ground, produce a dark, bitter beverage that resembles coffee but contains no caffeine. It was a common substitute, especially popular after the blockades of the Civil War made coffee scarce. Sometimes, for a bit of extra body, people would add toasted grain, ground up acorns, or even scorched breadcrumbs to the mix. It's hot and wet, and that's about the best you can say for it. As it brews, a sharp, vaguely earthy smell fills the small soddy. There is no sugar bowl on the table. If you're lucky, there might be a small jar of molasses or sorghum syrup to stir in to take the edge off the bitterness. As the coffee heats up, the main event is prepared in a large, greasy cast-iron skillet. The menu on the prairie or in a cattle drive camp was dictated by three principles: portability, longevity, and caloric density. Flavor and variety were distant, unaffordable dreams. The star of your breakfast and likely your lunch and dinner is salt pork. This isn't the delicate, smoky bacon, you know. This is pork that has been heavily cured in a mountain of salt to preserve it for months, if not years, without refrigeration. The cook slices off a few thick, fatty slabs and throws them into the hot skillet. An aggressive, spattering sizzle fills the room. The sheer amount of salt in the meat means it won't spoil, but it also means it's incredibly, mouth-puckeringly salty. The cook's job is to fry it long enough to render out most of the fat and cook off some of the overpowering saltiness. But it's a losing battle. The resulting meat is tough, greasy, and so saline it makes your eyes water. But it's calories, and calories are what will get you through the coming day of hard labor. What to go with your salt pork? There are no hash browns, no eggs Benedict. There might be some cornmeal mush boiled with water and a pinch of salt until it becomes a thick, bland gruel. But more likely, your side dish is the legendary hardtack. Also known as a molar breaker or sheet iron, hardtack is the ultimate survival food, a simple biscuit made of flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt. It's mixed into a stiff dough and baked until it is, quite literally, as hard as a rock. A testament to its durability, an authoritative historical fact is that some hardtack biscuits from the Civil War are still preserved in museums today. Perfectly edible, if you could somehow manage to chew them. You can't just bite into a piece of hardtack. You have to break it up with the butt of a knife or a rock, then soak the pieces in your chicory coffee until they soften into a sludgy, tasteless paste. You spoon the resulting brown mush into your mouth. It's not so much eaten as it is endured. So there it is, your breakfast, served up on a tin plate that still carries the faint taste of every meal that has ever been on it. You have a few pieces of tough, salty pork swimming in grease, a lump of hardtack softening in your bitter coffee, and maybe a side of cornmeal mush if it's a good day. It is a meal entirely composed of shades of brown and beige. There's no orange juice to provide a bit of vitamin C, no fresh fruit, no vibrant color. It's pure functional fuel, designed to get you from this moment until the next meal, and nothing more. The constant consumption of salted meat, cornmeal, and coffee without fresh produce led to rampant nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, a disease you associate with sailors on long sea voyages, was a very real threat on the prairie, causing weakness, gum disease, and bleeding from the skin. People just didn't know that a lack of vitamin C was the cause. You eat quickly, sitting on a hard wooden bench, shoulder to shoulder with your family or fellow ranch hands. Conversation is minimal. Mornings are for stoking the body's furnace, not for witty banter. You wash down the salty, greasy meal with another swallow of bitter chicory brew. The modern joke about an army marching on its stomach is no joke here. It's a profound truth. An army of settlers, cowboys, and miners marched on a stomach full of salt pork and hardtack. And it made them tough, yes, but it also made them chronically dehydrated and vaguely unwell. There are some who romanticize the cowboy breakfast. Big, hearty meals cooked over an open fire under the stars. And while those existed, the day-to-day reality for the average person carving out a life here was much more monotonous. Historians still debate the exact daily diet of a typical homesteader, as it varied greatly by location and season, but the core staples of preserved meat and simple grains were nearly universal. An odd fact to consider as you choke down your breakfast: one of the delicacies sometimes available was known as son of a bitch stew, a cowboy concoction made from the less desirable organs of a freshly slaughtered calf, including the heart, liver, tongue, and, critically, the marrow gut, all boiled in a pot. Suddenly your salt pork seems almost appealing, almost. Your meal is finished. It was salty, greasy, and boring, but you're full. And now the sun is beginning its slow climb. The workday is about to begin. With breakfast a salty memory in your gut, your attention turns to the next essential task of survival: water. Not just for drinking, but for cooking, for the livestock, for the pathetic-looking patch of vegetables you're trying to coax from the unforgiving soil. You grab 2 large wooden buckets by the door, the rough rope handles already stiff and cold. This is one of the most physically demanding chores of your day, and it happens every single day without fail. In the world you've left behind, you would simply turn a tap. Here, water is a heavy, precious commodity that you must physically wrestle from the earth. The weight of water is a hard-learned lesson. A gallon weighs a little over 8 pounds, and these buckets hold 5 gallons each. You're about to haul nearly 85 pounds of water from the well to your soddy, and you'll probably have to make this trip more than once. Well, if you're lucky, is right outside your door, a deep hole dug into the prairie, hopefully lined with stones to keep it from collapsing. You lower a bucket on a long rope, your hands already chafing against the coarse fibers. You feel the gentle thunk as it hits the water, then the much heavier resistance as you begin to pull it back up, hand over hand, your back and shoulders already straining. The water that fills the bucket is cold and, you pray, clean, but you can never be sure. Wells could be easily contaminated by surface runoff, which might carry animal waste or other unseen pollutants. There was no city water treatment plant, no EPA to set standards. Your water quality was a game of chance. You might be drinking from the same aquifer where, 100 yards away, your privy pit is slowly leaching its contents into the subsoil. If you don't have a well, the task is even more arduous. You might have to walk a quarter mile, a half mile, or even further to the nearest creek or river. And that journey is filled with its own hazards. The banks can be steep and muddy, a prime spot for a slip and a broken bone. The water itself is a moving repository for every dead animal, every pile of dung, and every bit of natural decay for miles upstream. You dip your buckets into the current, trying to find a spot that looks clearest, but it's a cosmetic judgment at best. The truly dangerous things in the water are invisible. This is where the story of the Wild West stops being a romantic adventure and becomes a terrifying lesson in microbiology. The number one killer in the American West was not gunfights, not clashes with Native Americans, not rattlesnake bites. It was disease. And the most prolific and horrifying of these were waterborne illnesses. The great terrors were cholera and dysentery, two words that should send a shiver down your spine. Cholera, caused by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae, was a swift and brutal killer. An authoritative historical fact is that during major 19th century outbreaks, the mortality rate for cholera could be over 50%. A person could be healthy in the morning and gone by nightfall. The disease caused severe diarrhea and vomiting, leading to such rapid dehydration that the body would go into shock. Its victims were often left with a bluish-grayish tint to their skin, a terrifying hallmark of the Blue Death. Dysentery, often caused by Shigella or Entamoeba histolytica, was less rapidly fatal but no less miserable. It caused severe abdominal cramps, fever, and bloody diarrhea. It would weaken you for weeks, leaving you unable to work, and often paved the way for other opportunistic infections. Entire pioneer wagon trains were ravaged by it. Military forts became death traps. The Oregon Trail is famously lined with graves, but most of those graves were dug not for victims of ambush, but for victims of a contaminated water barrel. You look at the buckets of water you just hauled, the water sloshing with every step. You can't see the bacteria, you can't smell them. The water might look crystal clear, but it could be a death sentence. And you have no way to purify it effectively. Boiling is the most reliable method, but that requires fuel. Fuel, whether wood or cow chips, is a resource you have to conserve for cooking and heating. You can't afford to boil every single drop of water you drink. You just drink it and hope. You hope that the source is clean. You hope that your constitution is strong. You hope that you don't get the cramps and fever that signal the beginning of the end. It's a constant low-level anxiety that underpins your entire existence. The great academic debate among some medical historians is just how aware the average person was of the connection between water and disease. While germ theory was not widely understood, people on the frontier weren't fools. They had a practical, if not scientific, understanding that water from certain sources seemed more likely to make people sick, leading to folklore and local wisdom about which creeks were safe and which were not. A kind of proto-epidemiology based on hard, tragic experience. As you pour the hard-won water into a large barrel inside the soddy, a tiny metallic glint catches your eye. No, it's not a fleck of gold. It's probably just a bit of mica. But it reminds you of a strange and rather gross off-topic fact about water from that time. In some parts of the world, people practiced a form of water purification that seems bizarre today. They would add small amounts of copper or silver to their water jugs, instinctively knowing what science would later prove. These metals have antimicrobial properties that can help kill certain pathogens. So while you're here risking cholera from creek water, someone, somewhere, is dropping a coin in their water pitcher, hoping it does the trick. You take a dipper full of water from the barrel. It's a communal dipper, of course, used by everyone in the household. You drink deeply, the cold liquid a balm for your throat, still parched from the salty breakfast. You swallow. And in that moment, you are gambling. You are spinning the great roulette wheel of 19th century life. Is this drink of water a life-sustaining necessity, or a Trojan horse filled with microscopic invaders? You can't know. All you can do is wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, put the dipper back, and get on with your day. The threat is invisible, constant, and utterly terrifying. Far more terrifying than a man with a six-shooter. Your greatest enemy isn't the outlaw in the black hat. It's the humble glass of water in your hand. Now that the essentials of your body's plumbing, both internal and external, have been addressed, it's time to get dressed for the day. This isn't a process of opening a closet full of options, contemplating color coordination, or checking the weather app. Your wardrobe is Spartan, functional, and deeply, profoundly uncomfortable by modern standards. You probably own 2 sets of clothing, one for everyday work and one for Sunday best, which is likely just your work set, only newer and with fewer stains. Everything you wear is designed for durability, not for a fashion-forward look. Your closet is a few wooden pegs on the wall, and your choices are brown, or a slightly different shade of brown. You start with the underwear. Forget soft, breathable cotton boxer briefs. You're wearing a union suit. This is a one-piece garment, buttoned up the front, that covers you from your neck to your wrists and ankles. It's the original onesie. In the winter, it's made of heavy, scratchy wool. It's wonderfully warm, which is its primary function. But it also feels like you're being hugged by a friendly porcupine all day long. In the summer, you might have a lighter-weight cotton version, but it's still a full-body affair. The most iconic feature, of course, is the rear access hatch, a buttoned flap, sometimes called a fireman's flap or drop seat. This ingenious bit of engineering allows you to use the outhouse without having to fully disrobe, which, as you'll recall from your frigid morning visit, is a true blessing. It is, however, not exactly the height of convenience or style. Imagine fumbling with 3 buttons on your backside in a hurry. It's a design that's ripe for a comical or a tragic mishap. Over the union suit go your pants. If you're a farmer or laborer, these are likely heavy wool or a stiff canvas duck material, not unlike modern work pants, but without the benefit of a century of fabric innovation. They are held up not by a sleek leather belt, but by suspenders or braces buttoned onto the waistband. The belt loop was not yet a standard feature on men's trousers. The definitive trousers of the era, however, were just beginning to make their mark. In 1873, a tailor named Jacob Davis and a dry goods magnate named Levi Strauss received a patent for their revolutionary idea, putting copper rivets at the stress points of men's work pants. This simple reinforcement made the pockets and seams much less likely to tear under the strain of hard labor. You might just be wearing a pair of these newfangled waist overalls, as they were called. They are stiff, dark, and dyed with indigo. The denim is not the soft, pre-washed fabric of today. It is raw and rigid, and it will take months of hard wear to break them in, molding them to your body and creating the unique fades and whiskers that a modern fashionista would pay a fortune for. Next comes your shirt, likely made of wool in the winter or a rough homespun cotton called Osnaburg in the summer. It's a simple, loose-fitting pullover or button-up affair, probably in a checked or plaid pattern. Plaid wasn't a hipster statement. It was a practical pattern that did a remarkable job of hiding dirt and stains. Solid colors, especially light ones, were a luxury for people who didn't have to work for a living. Your shirt, like your pants, smells of sweat, wood smoke, and the faint, dusty odor of the earth. Laundry day is a monumental all-day chore involving boiling water, harsh lye soap, and a washboard that would take the skin off your knuckles. You do it as infrequently as possible, sometimes only once a month. The result is that your clothes carry a permanent, baked-in layer of grime. You've forgotten what truly clean clothes feel like. A subtle yet constant physical discomfort. Footwear is arguably the most critical part of your attire. You pull on your boots, the same ones you wore to the privy. They are your constant companions, and their quality can mean the difference between a productive day and a miserable one. A good pair of boots was a significant investment. For cowboys, the classic high-heeled, pointed-toe boot was emerging as a specialized tool. The high heel kept your foot from sliding through the stirrup, and the pointed toe helped you find it quickly. But for a farmer or homesteader, you're more likely wearing practical lace-up work boots or simple, heavy leather pull-ons called brogans. They are stiff, heavy, and offer very little in the way of arch support. There are no cushioned insoles, no memory foam. You might stuff some spare wool or cloth into them to ward off blisters, but for the most part, you just endure the pain until your feet toughen up. Finally, you grab your hat. The hat is not a fashion accessory. It is an essential piece of equipment. In the summer, a wide-brimmed straw or felt hat protects you from the relentless, searing sun, warding off sunstroke and saving your eyes from the constant glare. In the winter, a heavy felt or fur cap keeps your head and ears from freezing. The hat is your umbrella, your sunshade, your bucket for watering your horse, and sometimes your pillow. Historians still debate the true dominance of the classic cowboy hat. While popular, it was far from the only style. Men in the West wore all manner of headgear: bowlers, derbies, military-style kepis, and Simple flat caps. The famous Stetson boss of the plains became an icon, but the daily reality was a hodgepodge of whatever a man could get his hands on that would keep the elements off his head. An interesting side note on fabrics. Before the invention of synthetic waterproof materials, people would waterproof their canvas or cotton coats by coating them in linseed oil, creating what was known as an oilskin duster. This was remarkably effective at repelling rain, but it also made the coat heavy, stiff, and gave it a distinct, oily smell that never went away. Just another little sensory assault to add to your day. You stand there now, fully dressed. You're encased in wool and stiff denim. Your boots are heavy on your feet. Your suspenders pull at your shoulders. Everything is a little too tight here, a little too loose there. Nothing is soft. Nothing is particularly clean. It's a uniform of utility. The complete lack of choice would be maddening to a modern mind. But to you, it's just getting dressed. The purpose of these clothes is not to express your personality. It is to create a thin, durable barrier between your fragile body and a world that is actively trying to freeze, burn, or scrape you. And with your sartorial armor in place, you are now ready to step outside and face it. Stepping out from the gray gloom of the Saudi, you are confronted by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the land. Your 160 acres. On paper, it sounded like a kingdom. Standing here now, it looks less like an opportunity and more like a punishment. An ocean of grass stretches in every direction, bowing and weaving under the same relentless wind that has been your constant companion since you woke. Your task for today and for most of the days for the foreseeable future is to tame a small patch of this wilderness. You must break the sod. It's a phrase that sounds deceptively simple, like you're just tearing a piece of paper. The reality is a brutal, all-day wrestling match with the planet itself. Your partner in this endeavor is not a sleek, air-conditioned tractor. It's a team of two lumbering, immensely powerful oxen, their breath pluming in the cool morning air. They stand yoked together, placidly chewing their cud, seemingly unimpressed by the monumental task ahead. Behind them sits the instrument of your labor, the breaking plow. This is no gentle garden tiller. It's a beast of cast iron and wood, heavy and brutish in its design. Its key feature is a single, sharp, polished steel blade, the plowshare, designed to slice through the dense, tangled mat of prairie grass roots that have been weaving themselves together for millennia. Your hands, already calloused but soon to be blistered, find their place on the two wooden handles at the rear of the plow. With a shout and a crack of a whip, more for sound than for striking the valuable animals, you urge the oxen forward. They lean into their yoke, their immense muscles straining, and the plow lurches into motion. The instant the plowshare bites into the earth, the work begins. A tremendous shudder runs up the frame of the plow and into your arms, jarring your entire skeleton. The sound is not a clean slicing noise. It is a violent tearing, a percussive ripping as the foot-thick layer of sod resists. You hear the snapping of countless roots, a sound like 1,000 ligaments tearing at once. Your job is not merely to walk behind the plow. You must fight it. You throw your entire body weight onto the handles, trying to keep the blade at the correct depth. Too shallow and it will skip uselessly over the top. Too deep and it will bury itself, bringing your entire operation to a grinding, frustrating halt. This is the very definition of grueling physical labor. Your back, shoulders, and legs are screaming within the first hour. The sun, which felt so distant this morning, is beginning its slow, unforgiving climb, beating down on your neck. Sweat stings your eyes and plasters your grimy shirt to your skin. The dust kicked up by the plow and the animals coats your throat and turns to mud in your mouth. There are no breaks for coffee or checking your social media. There is only the endless rolling sea of grass and the small dark ribbon of overturned earth you leave in your wake. The world shrinks to the two bobbing rumps of the oxen in front of you and the violent, shuddering handles in your hands. A modern high-intensity interval workout has absolutely nothing on this. And then there's the danger. There are no safety regulations here, no OSHA to file a complaint with. The prairie is littered with hidden hazards. If the plowshare strikes a buried rock, a common occurrence, the plow can kick back with vicious, unrestrained force. The wooden handles could slam into your ribs, cracking them in an instant. Or the jolt could throw you to the ground, and before you could scramble away, the heavy plow itself might drag over your leg. The animals, though usually placid, could be spooked by a rattlesnake or a sudden noise, bolting and dragging you along with them. An injury out here is not an inconvenience. It is a catastrophe. There's no 911 to call, no urgent care clinic a 5-minute drive away. A broken leg could mean a slow, agonizing death from infection, or, if you were lucky, a messy amputation on your kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey for an anesthetic. You stop for a moment at the end of a long furrow, leaning on the plow, chest heaving. You look back at your work. You have been at it for hours, and the amount of land you have broken seems pitifully small. This is a brutal truth of homesteading. An authoritative historical fact is that even with a good team of oxen and a strong back, a settler could typically only break 1 to 2 acres of virgin prairie per day. You were granted 160 acres. At that rate, it would take you 3 to 4 months of non-stop, back-breaking labor just to plow a quarter of your land for the first time. The sheer, demoralizing scale of the work is hard to comprehend. It has led some historians to debate the true mindset of the homesteader. Were they driven by an unwavering optimism and a belief in the American dream of self-sufficiency? Or was their daily reality one of quiet, soul-crushing despair, their hopes slowly eroding with every foot of hard-won soil? Sometimes the obstacles were too big for even the oxen. A large, stubborn tree stump or a deeply embedded boulder could stop you for days. In these cases, farmers often turn to a shockingly common and terrifyingly dangerous tool: dynamite. An odd but true fact is that agricultural dynamite, or stumping powder, was readily available and widely used for land clearing. You would drill a hole, stuff it with unstable nitroglycerin-based explosive, light a fickle fuse, and run. There were no training courses, no safety manuals, just a prayer that you lit the fuse correctly and ran far enough. The line between successful land clearing and accidental self-demolition was a thin one indeed. But for now, your work is just the plow, the oxen, and the earth. You continue this for the rest of the day, a monotonous cycle of sweat, strain, and sound. Walk the furrow, fight the plow, turn the team, and start again. Finally, as the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, painting the vast sky in shades of orange and purple, you call a halt. Your body isn't just tired, it feels broken. Every muscle is a knot of pain. Your hands are raw, your back is a solid sheet of agony, and your ears are ringing with the phantom sound of tearing roots. You unyoke the patient oxen, leading them to their water, their work done. You, caked in a thick layer of dirt and sweat, are left to stumble back to the soddy. The reward for your day of grueling labor? A salty, monotonous dinner, a few hours of exhausted rest on a lumpy straw mattress, and the knowledge that you get to do it all over again tomorrow. Your grueling day of sod busting is finally over, but now you're faced with a different kind of challenge. A neighbor living on a claim a few miles away is sick, and your family needs to send over some precious medicine and a bit of stew. The problem is distance. Miles on the open prairie are not like miles on a modern highway. There are no paved roads, no signposts, no friendly GPS voice to guide you. Travel in the 19th century was slow, uncomfortable, and often fraught with peril. Your options are limited, and none of them are good. Your first choice, and the most common for short distances, is your own 2 feet. But walking across the prairie is not a pleasant hike on a nature trail. The ground is uneven, pockmarked with gopher holes that seem perfectly designed to twist an ankle. In the summer, the sun is a brutal, relentless force, and there is no shade to be found in the endless sea of grass. You have to carry your own water, and if you misjudge the distance or the heat, you could be in serious trouble from dehydration or sunstroke. In the winter, a sudden blizzard, a terrifying phenomenon known as a whiteout, could descend with shocking speed, reducing visibility to zero and disorienting you completely. People could, and did, freeze to death just yards from their own front door, lost in the swirling, suffocating snow. A significant step up is to go on horseback. Your horse is not a pet. It is a vital piece of living equipment. It's your pickup truck and your ATV rolled into one. Riding allows you to cover ground much faster than walking, but it comes with its own set of discomforts and dangers. You're not riding on a plush, cushioned English saddle. Your saddle is a heavy, functional piece of leather and wood, designed for long hours of work. After a few hours, every part of your body that is in contact with that saddle will be sore. Chafing is a constant, unpleasant reality. Then there is the horse itself. It's an animal with a mind of its own. It can stumble, it can be spooked, it can throw you. A fall from a horse can lead to anything from a simple bruise to a broken neck. You are placing your trust and your life on the whims of a 1,000-pound animal. But for this journey, carrying supplies, your family decides to take the wagon. This isn't the romantic, canvas-covered Conestoga wagon of pioneer mythology. That was the semi-truck of its day, too large and cumbersome for daily use. Your farm wagon is a much simpler, more brutal affair. It is essentially a wooden box on 4 wooden wheels with iron rims. The key feature to note is the complete and utter lack of a suspension system. There are no shock absorbers, no springs. The axle is bolted directly to the wagon bed. This means that every single bump, rock, and rut in the path is transferred directly up through the wooden wheels, into the wagon, and into your bones. It's an experience that can only be described as a controlled, full-body vibration for the entire duration of the trip. The old saying was that a day in a wagon would rattle the teeth out of your head, and it wasn't far from the truth. The journey begins. Your father or an older sibling takes the reins, guiding the mule or horse that pulls the wagon. You sit in the back, guarding the precious cargo. The slow, creaking, groaning, and bumping is relentless. It's impossible to read, impossible to nap, impossible even to have a coherent conversation. You are simply jostled and jarred, second after second, minute after minute. The average speed of a farm wagon over rough prairie might be 3 to 4 miles an hour. A 5-mile trip to your neighbor's homestead could easily take more than an hour, and it would feel like an eternity. Historians continue to debate the physical toll this kind of travel took on the body over a lifetime, with some suggesting that chronic back pain and joint problems were nearly universal among those who regularly used such wagons. It was slow, agonizing, and mind-numbingly boring. The routes you follow are not roads, but simple tracks worn into the prairie by the passage of other wagons. If it has rained recently, these tracks become long, parallel stripes of deep, thick mud, a substance called gumbo that can suck your wagon wheels down to the hubs, stopping you dead. Then you would have to get out and, with lever and log, try to pry the wheels free, all while being caked in the thick, sticky ooze. River crossings are another major hazard. There are no bridges. You must find a shallow spot, a ford, and hope for the best. You guide your animals into the water, hoping the current isn't too strong, hoping the riverbed is firm and not soft mud, hoping your wagon doesn't get swept away, taking you and all your possessions with it. The authoritative historical fact is that drowning at river crossings was one of the leading causes of death for travelers on the overland trails. As you bump along, watching the landscape slowly, agonizingly crawl by, you might reflect on an odd fact of 19th century travel: the first ever road trip across the United States. In 1898, a man named H. Nelson Jackson made a bet that he could drive an automobile from San Francisco to New York City in under 90 days. He did it in 63. But the journey was so arduous on a continent with virtually no paved roads or gas stations that it was considered an almost superhuman feat of endurance. His journey highlights just how revolutionary the automobile would be, consigning the bone-jarring wagon to the museums where it belongs. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime of jostling, you see your neighbor's small soddy on the horizon. You pull up, deliver the medicine and food, and exchange a few words of comfort and news. The entire endeavor, hitching the wagon, the brutal journey there, the equally brutal journey back, takes the better part of 3 hours. 3 hours to cover a distance a modern car would handle in under 10 minutes on a smooth, paved road while you sit in a climate-controlled seat listening to your favorite music. You return to your home sore, exhausted, and covered in a fine layer of dust. The wagon, your amazing piece of 19th century technology, has served its purpose. It has successfully moved you from one point to another, but it has extracted a physical price for the privilege. Travel was not about enjoyment or sightseeing. It was a necessary evil, an uncomfortable and often dangerous ordeal to be endured, not enjoyed. The trip to your neighbors was successful, but the reason for the journey lingers in your mind. Sickness. It hangs over every aspect of life in the 19th century like a constant, menacing shadow. Back at your own soddy, you notice your younger brother has been coughing, a dry, rasping sound that seems to echo too loudly in the small room. He feels warm to the touch. In your modern life, this would trigger a simple response. A thermometer, some children's ibuprofen, plenty of fluids, and a watchful eye. Here it is the beginning of a spiral into terrifying uncertainty. Your medicine chest is not filled with scientifically formulated and tested pharmaceuticals. It is a small wooden box containing folk remedies, patent medicines, and perhaps a few raw ingredients whose use is based more on tradition than evidence. You don't have a thermometer. You judge fever by the heat of the skin and the flush of the cheek. You might have a bottle of something called a fever reducer, a patent medicine purchased from a traveling salesman or the general store. It's a dark liquid in a glass bottle with a fancy paper label promising miraculous results. You have no idea what's in it. Most of these concoctions were a mixture of alcohol and opium, or sometimes more dangerous substances like morphine or even cocaine. They didn't cure anything, of course. They simply stupefied the patient, making them feel better temporarily by dulling their senses. In giving this to your brother, you could be giving him a dose of a highly addictive and dangerous narcotic. It's a desperate gamble born of fear and a lack of other options. As the day wears on, your brother's cough gets worse. It's deeper now, and he complains of a sharp pain in his chest. These are the classic signs of pneumonia, one of the era's most prolific killers. Pneumonia wasn't called the captain of the men of death for nothing. Before the discovery of antibiotics, it was a lethal threat. There was no course of penicillin or azithromycin. Treatment consisted of bed rest, keeping the patient warm, and trying to get them to eat. Medical intervention, when it was available, could be frighteningly primitive and often harmful. One common practice was cupping, where a heated glass cup was placed on the patient's back. As the air in the cup cooled, it created a vacuum, sucking the skin up into the glass. This was thought to draw the sickness out of the body. In reality, it did little more than leave large, painful bruises. If a doctor could be summoned, a major if, given the distances and costs involved, their tools would not inspire much confidence. Germ theory, as we've discussed, was still in its infancy. An authoritative historical fact is that as late as the 1870s, many prominent physicians still rejected the idea that invisible germs caused disease, clinging to older theories like miasma, the idea that sickness was caused by bad air or foul smells. A doctor might arrive, not having washed his hands, and proceed to examine your brother with instruments that were wiped clean on a cloth, but not sterilized. His primary philosophy of treatment was likely heroic medicine, an aggressive approach focused on balancing the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a medical theory dating back to ancient Greece. The main tools of heroic medicine were bleeding and purging. The doctor might open a vein in your brother's arm with a lancet and drain a significant amount of his blood into a bowl, believing this would reduce the fever and inflammation. In his weakened state, This loss of blood would only make him more vulnerable. Then would come the purging. The doctor would administer powerful emetics and cathartics, designed to induce violent vomiting and diarrhea. A common choice was calomel, a compound containing mercury chloride. It certainly worked. It would purge the body with a vengeance. But it was also a poison. Calomel toxicity could lead to tooth loss, jawbone decay, and severe neurological damage. The cure was quite literally poison. Historians still debate the true efficacy of 19th century doctors. Were they well-intentioned practitioners working with the best knowledge of their time? Or were many of them, as George Washington is rumored to have said on his deathbed, little more than killers? The fear and helplessness you would feel watching this unfold is hard to overstate. Your loved one is struggling to breathe, and the expert you've called is subjecting them to treatments that seem more like torture. It's no wonder that many people on the frontier prefer to trust in home remedies and the care of family. One particularly odd and stomach-turning remedy for a sore throat or cough was to take a piece of salt pork, sprinkle it heavily with black pepper, and tie it around the patient's neck with a dirty sock. The logic, if any, is lost to time, but it speaks to the desperation and the grasp-at-straws nature of folk medicine. Think of that next time you see a quirky life hack video. This is its 19th century ancestor, but with much higher stakes. For tonight, you don't call a doctor. You can't afford it, and he's too far away. You do what you can. You prop your brother up on pillows to help his breathing. You spoon broth into his mouth. You wipe his feverish brow with a cloth dipped in cool, but not boiled water. You pray. Medicine for you is not a science. It is an act of faith, a desperate appeal to a higher power, and a collection of traditions passed down through generations. There are no miracle drugs, no high-tech ICUs. There is only the thin wool blanket, the stuffy air of the Saudi, and the terrifying realization that your brother's survival has very little to do with anything you or anyone else can do for him. It is a battle he must fight on his own, and all you can do is watch and wait and feel the cold dread of what the morning might bring. The worry for your brother casts a pall over everything, but life has to go on. The pantry is getting bare, and you need to make a trip to the nearest settlement to replenish your supplies. This isn't a quick jaunt to a brightly lit supermarket with endless aisles of choices. This is a significant all-day journey to a place that is likely little more than a dusty street with a few rough-hewn wooden buildings, a saloon, a blacksmith, maybe a land office, and the vital center of it all, the general store. The general store was the 19th century equivalent of Amazon, the hardware store, the grocery store, and the pharmacy all rolled into one cramped, cluttered, and wonderfully fragrant space. You hitch the wagon for the long, bone-rattling journey, a trip made even more miserable by your frayed nerves. After a few hours, you arrive. The store is the most impressive building in town. It has a proper wooden facade, a porch with a few men whittling and spitting tobacco juice, and maybe even a real glass window. Pushing open the door, your senses are immediately overwhelmed. The air is thick with 100 competing smells. The rich, earthy scent of ground coffee beans. The real stuff, a rare treat. The sharp tang of vinegar from a barrel, the sweetness of molasses, the pungent odor of leather goods, the metallic smell of hardware, and underlying it all, the dust of the prairie. The light inside is dim, filtering through the grimy window and the open door. Every inch of space from the floor to the ceiling is packed with goods. You clutch your small list of necessities. First up, canned goods. The invention of canning in the early 19th century was a revolution in food preservation, allowing people on the frontier access to fruits and vegetables out of season. You might buy a can of peaches or tomatoes. However, these early cans were not the seamless aluminum containers we know today. They were often crudely made of iron, and an authoritative historical fact is that they were sealed shut with a lead-based solder. Often, the sloppy soldering process would leave beads of lead on the inside of the can, which would then leach into the acidic contents. People were unknowingly serving their families a small dose of lead with every spoonful of canned peaches. Chronic low-level lead poisoning, which can cause developmental delays, abdominal pain, and neurological issues, was a completely invisible threat lurking in the pantry. Next on the list is flour and sugar. These don't come in neatly sealed paper bags. They are stored in massive barrels, and the storekeeper uses a scoop to measure out the amount you need into a cloth sack that you've brought from home. As he scoops, you can't help but notice the state of the barrels. The lids are often loose, offering an open invitation to mice, weevils, and other pests. It was not at all uncommon to find a few extra ingredients in your flour. The joke at the time was that you didn't have to add meat to your biscuits because it was already in the flour. This lack of sanitation was not seen as a crisis. It was simply a part of life. You'd sift the flour at home to remove the worst of the debris and try not to think about what might be left behind. You wander further down the cluttered aisle, which is really just a narrow path between stacks of crates and barrels. You see tools, axes, saws, hammers. You see clothing, bolts of gingham and calico fabric, stiff denim overalls, wool socks. You see household goods, cast iron skillets, tin plates, kerosene for the lamps that would provide the dim, flickering light in your Saudi after dark. Everything is practical. Everything is essential. This is not a place of idle consumerism. It is a depot of survival. But among the essentials, there are also the tempting non-essentials. Brightly colored tins of candy, jars of pickled eggs on the counter, and of course the ever-present patent medicines. You see the bottle of fever reducer that you have at home, sitting right next to a nerve tonic, mostly alcohol, a worm syrup, often containing dangerous chemicals like turpentine, and a soothing syrup for teething babies, a horrifying mixture of morphine and alcohol that was responsible for countless infant deaths. The slick marketing and extravagant claims preyed on the fears and desperation of people with no other medical options. The transaction itself is a slow, personal process. There are no barcodes, no credit card terminals. The storekeeper, a man who knows everyone and everything in the county, writes down your purchases in a large ledger book. Many transactions are done on credit. As a homesteader, you have very little cash. You are good for it, and the storekeeper makes a note of your debt to be settled after the harvest, assuming the harvest comes in. The whole economic structure of the community rests on these webs of trust and credit, recorded in smudged pencil in a dusty book. It's here that the academic debate over the role of the general store owner comes into play. Were they benevolent community pillars, extending credit to help their neighbors survive? Or were they shrewd capitalists who used the credit system to trap settlers in a cycle of debt, effectively owning them and their farms? The answer most likely is a bit of both, varying from town to town and storekeeper to storekeeper. Before you leave it, you remember one more thing. Soap. You see the same harsh yellow lye soap you use at home, but also a new, fancier option. An odd fact from the era, in 1879, a worker at Procter & Gamble accidentally left a soap mixing machine on for too long, whipping an excess amount of air into a batch of their new white soap. The result was a soap that floated. Instead of discarding the ruined batch, a clever executive marketed it as a feature. Ivory soap was born, and its purity and, more importantly, its inability to be lost in the murky water of a bathtub or a river made it a huge commercial success. Maybe you splurge on a bar. It feels like an extravagant luxury. You load your precious and potentially hazardous supplies into the wagon. The sacks of flour and sugar, the lead-soldered cans, the questionable medicine. Each item represents a small victory against the constant scarcity of your life. But each one also carries a hidden risk, a downside you are not equipped to understand. The general store was a lifeline, the fragile link to the industrial world back east. But it was also a place where the dangers were not always obvious. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you brought into your home wasn't the weather or a wild animal, but a simple can of peaches bought at the general store. You begin the long, bumpy ride home, the new worries of lead poisoning and weevils mingling with the ever-present anxiety about your sick brother. The journey back from the general store is long and taxing, and by the time you've unhitched the wagon and stored your meager, precious supplies, dusk is beginning to settle. Your father, his face etched with the worry of your sick brother and the strain of a hard life, announces he's going into town for a drink and to hear any news that might be circulating. For many men on the frontier, the saloon was the one and only place for social interaction, a brief, masculine escape from the crushing isolation of the farm or the tedium of the cattle trail. You've never been inside one, but you can picture it, a place both alluring and deeply intimidating. It's a world with its own unwritten rules, its own language, and its own unique set of dangers. You imagine your father pushing through the swinging half doors, an iconic invention that allowed for ventilation and a tantalizing glimpse of the interior while still offering a modicum of privacy. He steps from the dusty quiet of the street into a cacophony of sound and smell. The air is a thick blue haze of tobacco smoke, so dense you could carve it. It smells of stale beer, cheap whiskey, sweat, and unwashed bodies. A long, polished wooden bar runs the length of one wall, presided over by a bartender in a white shirt and apron, the keeper of this chaotic sanctuary. The floor is covered in sawdust, a practical measure to soak up spilled drinks, tobacco spit, and whatever else might hit the floor. Along the bar is a brass rail for tired men to rest a boot on, and strategically placed brass spittoons, which are only occasionally used with any degree of accuracy. Your father nods to the bartender and orders a whiskey. He doesn't ask for a specific brand name. There is no top shelf. The whiskey is poured from a generic, unlabeled bottle or directly from a barrel. It's red-eye or rot gut, a fiery, raw, and often poorly distilled spirit that would burn a hole in a leather boot. Quality control was non-existent. An authoritative historical fact is that many whiskeys served in frontier saloons were not aged spirits at all, but rather raw grain alcohol diluted with water and then colored and flavored with things like burnt sugar, chewing tobacco for that rich brown hue, or even strychnine to give it a more potent kick. Every drink was a roll of the dice. Your father pays his nickel or his dime, downs the fiery liquid in a single gulp, and feels the immediate welcome burn that momentarily eclipses the day's worries. He finds a spot at a round, scarred wooden table where a few other men are playing cards. This is the heart of the saloon's social life. It wasn't all about getting drunk. It was a place to do business, to hire hands, to sell a horse, to hear news from back east that might have come in on the telegraph, or to just talk. The isolation of frontier life was profound, and the saloon was the antidote. It was the community center, the newsroom, and the living room, all in one smoke-filled package. But it was also a place where tensions ran high. Men weary from hard labor and often lonely and desperate would gather, and the combination of alcohol and bruised egos could be a volatile one. The unwritten rules of the saloon were paramount to survival. You did not talk about another man's past. You did not ask personal questions. You certainly did not cheat at cards. A simple misunderstanding, a spilled drink, or an accusation of dishonesty could escalate with terrifying speed. There was a code of conduct that everyone understood implicitly. A man's honor was a fragile, fiercely defended thing. A verbal insult was not something to be brushed off. It was a direct challenge that had to be met. Historians still debate the true level of violence in the average saloon. Was every card game a tinderbox waiting to explode, as Hollywood would have us believe? Or was most of the interaction peaceful, with violence being a rare and shocking exception? The truth is likely somewhere in between. Most nights were probably dull and uneventful, punctuated by moments of sharp, sudden brutality. You also wouldn't find many women here. The saloon was an overwhelmingly male domain. Respectable women would not be caught dead in such a place. The only female presence would likely be the soiled doves or painted ladies, saloon girls whose job was to sell drinks, provide conversation, and often sell companionship. Their lives were incredibly difficult and dangerous, subject to the whims of both their customers and their employers. An odd and perhaps sad fact about saloon life pertains to the free lunch. In an effort to attract customers, many saloons offered a spread of food that was free for anyone who bought a drink. It sounds generous, but it was a calculated business move. The food offered was always intensely salty: pickled eggs, salted fish, pretzels, crackers. The salt, of course, would make the patrons incredibly thirsty, leading them to buy more and more drinks. It was the 19th century version of putting salty peanuts on the bar. Your father is not looking for trouble. He listens to the talk, picks up a bit of gossip about cattle prices, has a second drink to fortify himself for the long, dark ride home. He knows the rules. He keeps to himself, watches the card game from a safe distance, and nurses his drink. He is there for the simple human contact, the momentary relief from the silence of the prairie. The saloon, for all its grime, its potential for violence, and its questionable whiskey, served a vital psychological function. It was a pressure valve for the immense stresses of frontier life. But it was always a risk. Every time a man pushed through those swinging doors, he was stepping into an environment where his survival depended not on his skill with the land, but on his ability to navigate a complex and treacherous social landscape. After an hour, your father has had enough. He nods to the bartender, pushes back out into the cool night air, and begins the journey home, the smell of smoke and cheap whiskey clinging to his coat. Your father returns an hour or so later, the scent of the saloon clinging to him, a ghost of smoke and stale whiskey. You feel a quiet wave of relief as he stomps the dust from his boots and latches the door. The saloon in your imagination is a place of loud noises and quick tempers, the starting point for the kind of trouble that defines the Wild West in stories. This lingering fear pivots your thoughts toward the most potent and misunderstood symbol of this era: the gun. The stories you've heard, the dime novels you might have seen, are filled with heroic gunslingers, men who solve their problems with a lightning-fast draw and unerring aim. The reality of the gun in your life is something altogether different. It is far less glamorous and far more grim. Your family almost certainly owns a firearm, but it's not a pearl-handled Colt Peacemaker in a tooled leather holster. It's likely a long, heavy shotgun leaning in a corner near the door, its primary purpose being to shoot a prairie chicken for the pot, or discourage a coyote from getting too close to your lone cow. Or maybe it's an old surplus rifle from the Civil War, its wooden stock dark and dented from years of use. It is a tool like your axe or your plow. It's heavy, cumbersome, and probably not very well maintained. You might also have a handgun, a big, heavy cap-and-ball revolver, likely kept unloaded in a wooden box, a relic of some past journey or conflict. It is not an object of reverence, it's a piece of dangerous utilitarian hardware. The cinematic fantasy of the quick-draw shootout at high noon is almost entirely a myth, a fabrication of traveling Wild West shows and later Hollywood. Most people didn't carry their handguns in low-slung, tied-down holsters designed for speed. That was a movie invention. A real holster was a simple leather pouch designed to do one thing: keep the gun from falling out while you were riding a horse. Getting a gun out of one was often a clumsy, two-handed affair. The idea of two men facing off in the street waiting for a clock to strike is pure theater. A real frontier gunfight was almost always a surprise. It was a messy, desperate, and often very close-range ambush. It was more likely to be two drunk men fumbling for their weapons inside a dark, crowded saloon than a choreographed duel in the sun. And even if you did manage to get your gun out, hitting what you were aiming at was another matter entirely. Period firearms, especially handguns like the famous Colt single-action army, were notoriously inaccurate in the hands of an average user. They had crude, fixed iron sights, a simple notch at the back, and a blade at the front. The trigger pull was heavy. In a moment of panic, with your heart hammering and your hands shaking, the odds of you hitting a man-sized target at 25 yards were shockingly low. You'd be lucky to hit the wall behind the man. The term gunslinger implies a level of skill and artistry that very few people actually possessed. Most men who carried a gun were terrible shots. It's a bit like assuming everyone who owns a guitar is a rock star. Most of us just make a lot of noise. The Wild West reputation for lawlessness is also something of a caricature. An authoritative historical fact is that many of the most famous cattle towns, like Dodge City and Tombstone, had strict gun control ordinances. Upon entering town limits, visitors were legally required to check their firearms with the sheriff or at their hotel. The violence often occurred when people ignored these laws. The legendary gunfight at the OK Corral, for instance, happened in large part because the cowboys refused to surrender their weapons, as Tombstone's local ordinance demanded. Far from being a land of unchecked gun violence, the organized towns of the West were often far less dangerous than the industrial slums of the East. This leads to an ongoing debate among historians. Was the American West truly as violent as its reputation suggests? Many argue that the perception of violence fanned by sensationalist newspapers and dime novels created a myth that far outstripped the statistical reality. Homicide rates in some of these wild towns were often lower than in modern-day American cities. So, what would a real gunfight be like? Forget the clean, quiet pings of a movie. The first thing you'd experience is the noise. It would be deafeningly loud, especially indoors, a series of concussive, jarring explosions that would leave your ears ringing. The second thing is the smoke. These guns used black powder, which upon ignition produced a thick, dense cloud of foul-smelling white smoke. After just one or two shots in an enclosed space, visibility would drop to near zero. You'd be deafened and blinded, fumbling in a haze, firing at shadows and sound. It wouldn't be a heroic duel. It would be a chaotic, terrifying mess. And the wounds were devastating. The heavy, slow-moving lead bullets created massive internal damage. Getting shot was not a guarantee of a quick, clean death. It was often the start of a slow, agonizing one, with infection being the likely killer. As a final nail in the coffin of the slick gunslinger myth, consider the belly gun, an odd but practical weapon of the era. This was often a large-caliber revolver that had its barrel sawed off to just an inch or two, and its hammer spur ground down so it wouldn't snag on clothing. It wasn't designed for aiming. It was designed to be easily concealed and used at arm's length. You would simply shove it into your adversary's gut, hence the name, and pulled the trigger. No skill, no honor, no distance. Just brutal, point-blank efficiency. It was the weapon of the desperate, the fearful, and the truly dangerous, and it is a far more accurate representation of frontier violence than any quick-draw duel. The gun was a part of life, yes, but its true nature was clumsy, messy, and thankfully far less common than the legends would have you believe. The real killers were still cholera, pneumonia, and a twisted ankle. The night deepens, the wind whistling its lonely tune around the corners of your soddy. The fear of gun violence, while statistically less likely than the dime novels suggest, was still real. It stemmed from a deeper, more pervasive anxiety, the fragility of law and order itself. In the settled, structured world back east, there was a clear hierarchy of law enforcement, a system of courts, and a general understanding that society had rules. Here, on the edge of civilization, that system was thin, stretched to the breaking point, and often completely absent. Justice was not a reliable public utility. It was a rough-hewn, improvised shelter that could collapse at any moment. In the small, dusty settlement your father just visited, there might be a sheriff. But this isn't the stoic, incorruptible lawman of Western films. This man was likely elected, which meant he was a politician as much as a peacekeeper. His job depended on keeping the influential citizens, the saloon owner, the rancher with the most land, the general store proprietor, happy. He was almost certainly not a trained professional. He was probably a farmer, a former soldier, or even just a tough guy who wanted the modest salary and the semblance of authority. His jurisdiction was vast, covering hundreds of square miles of thinly populated territory, and his resources were minimal. He had a badge, a gun, And maybe, if the town was prosperous, a small, flimsy wooden jail that a determined prisoner could probably dismantle from the inside out. Imagine a crime occurs. Someone steals your horse, a devastating economic blow that threatens your very survival. What do? You could ride for hours or even days to find the sheriff. You would report the crime and he would dutifully write it down. But then what? He has no CSI team to gather evidence, no network of police cruisers to put out an alert. He's one man on a horse. He might form a posse, gathering a group of willing and able-bodied citizens to ride with him. But a posse was just a group of deputized amateurs, more mob than a professional police force. Their pursuit of a horse thief across the open, trackless prairie had a slim chance of success. More often than not, the stolen horse and the thief were simply gone forever. This is why, in many cases, people took the law into their own hands. If a community felt the official legal system was too slow, too corrupt, or too far away, they would form a vigilance committee or a vigilante group. This sounds noble, like citizens banding together for the common good. But the reality was often much darker. A vigilante group operated without due process. There was no judge, no jury of peers, no defense attorney. A man accused by the vigilantes was presumed guilty. His trial might be a brief interrogation under a tree, and the sentence was almost always the same: a rope over a sturdy branch. While vigilantes sometimes did catch and punish genuine outlaws, they were also prone to acting on rumor, settling personal grudges, or being whipped into a frenzy of mob mentality. The line between community justice and lynch law was perilously thin. An authoritative historical fact is that the largest vigilante movement in American history, the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance of 1856, numbered between 6,000 and 8,000 members. They usurped the official government, conducted secret trials, and executed and deported those they deemed undesirable. They were, for all intents and purposes, a private government ruling through fear. This illustrates the core tension of frontier justice. When official institutions fail, do people have the right to create their own? It's a debate that historians continue to wrestle with, exploring the complex motives that drove ordinary people to bypass the law and administer their own brutal and often final form of justice. Even when the formal legal system did work, it was a strange and often chaotic spectacle. Picture a circuit court in session. The judge, a traveling magistrate who covers a massive territory, arrives in town maybe twice a year. Court is held not in an imposing stone courthouse, but in the saloon or the general store. The lawyers, often as rough and tumble as their clients, argue their cases in front of a jury pulled from the men loafing around town. The atmosphere would be loud, informal, and fueled by whiskey from the bar just a few feet away. Justice wasn't blind, it was blurry-eyed and trying to hear the testimony over a poker game in the corner. In this world of uncertain justice, a man's reputation was his most valuable asset. A reputation for honesty could get you credit at the store. A reputation for being tough, for being someone not to be trifled with, could be more effective at protecting your property than any lawman. It was a system built on personal character rather than abstract legal codes. It forced a kind of rough-hewn civility, an understanding that actions had direct and often immediate consequences, not from the law but from your neighbors. And this could be a good thing, fostering tight-knit communities. But it could also lead to bloody multi-generational feuds over insults or property disputes, like the famous Hatfield-McCoy feud, which started over a stolen pig and spiraled into decades of murder and revenge. A strange and off-topic fact related to American law of the period is the story of the Great Imposter, a man named Stanley Weyman. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this man, with no legal or medical training whatsoever, successfully impersonated numerous public officials, doctors, and even the consul of Peru. His success speaks to an era where credentials were easy to fake, and people were often taken at face value. An environment where a charming charlatan could thrive right alongside the hard-working sheriff and the grim-faced vigilante. It all paints a picture of a society making up the rules as it went along. Law and order wasn't a given. It was a fragile human construct, and you lived with the constant, unsettling knowledge that if you got into real trouble, you were most likely on your own. As the last embers in the pot-bellied stove begin to die down, casting long, dancing shadows across the dirt walls of your soddy, you become aware of the other inhabitants of your home. These aren't your family members stirring in their sleep. These are the smaller, quieter, and infinitely more numerous residents of the prairie who have decided that your house is their house. In your modern, sealed home, a spider is a cause for a minor domestic incident. Here you are living in a porous, breathing ecosystem, and you are merely the largest of its tenants. Pests are not an occasional nuisance. They are a constant, crawling, and sometimes biting fact of life. The most intimate and irritating of these uninvited guests are the ones that share your bed. Remember that straw-filled mattress you collapsed onto every night? It's a paradise for bed bugs, fleas, and lice. As you try to sleep, you can feel their tiny, almost imperceptible movements. An itch on your leg, a prickle on your neck. You scratch and turn, but there is no escape. The lye soap you use is harsh, but it's not a delousing agent. These tiny vampires are your constant companions, leaving you with a collection of small, itchy red welts every morning. They are a physical torment, a constant reminder that your personal space is perpetually invaded. At best, it's a source of maddening discomfort. At worst, it's a vector for disease. Fleas famously can carry the plague, and body lice can transmit epidemic typhus, another deadly 19th century scourge. Then there are the sounds. The rustle you heard this morning when you awoke? That wasn't just the wind. Mice are a constant presence. They scrabble in the walls, which are, after all, made of their natural habitat. They race across the rafters overhead, sometimes losing their footing and dropping onto your bed in the middle of the night. A truly unpleasant wake-up call. They get into your food stores, contaminating your precious flour and grain with their droppings. You might have a cat, a semi-feral mouser who earns its keep, but it's a never-ending battle. The sheer number of rodents on the Great Plains was legendary. You aren't just fighting the mice in your house, you are fighting the entire local mouse population that has identified your soddy as the best restaurant for miles around. And where there are mice, there are snakes. While most of them are harmless, like the garter snakes that sometimes sun themselves on your sod roof, there's always the fear of the venomous ones. The prairie rattlesnake, though it prefers to avoid humans, might wander into your home seeking warmth or in pursuit of a mouse. A rattling sound from a dark corner of the room would be one of the most terrifying sounds imaginable. The risk of being bitten, especially at night when you might step on one by accident, was a real and frightening possibility. A rattlesnake bite on the frontier, far from any medical help or anti-venom, was frequently a death sentence. During the day, especially in the summer, the air itself seems to be full of pests. Swarms of flies, drawn by the smell of your livestock, your outhouse, and your cooking, are a constant, buzzing plague. They land on your food, on your face, and your eyes. There are no screen doors or windows. The only way to keep them out is to shut the door and swelter in the dark, stuffy heat. And then there are the mosquitoes. In areas near standing water, they rise in thick, whining clouds at dusk, delivering itchy bites and carrying the threat of malaria. An authoritative historical fact is that malaria was once rampant across much of the United States, including parts of the Midwest and the Great Plains. The settlers didn't know that mosquitoes were the vector. They blamed it on the miasma, or bad air, rising from the swamps, which is why they named it malaria, Italian for bad air. But perhaps the most terrifying of all the insect swarms was the locust. A plague of locusts on the prairie was a thing of biblical, apocalyptic terror. These were not just a few grasshoppers. These were swarms so dense they blocked out the sun, turning midday into a gloomy twilight. An attack could last for days. The sound was a deafening, unified roar of clicking and chewing. They would descend on your farm and devour everything. They ate the corn in the fields, the vegetables in your garden, the leaves on the few trees you might have managed to grow. An odd and horrifying fact is that they would even eat the clothes off your back, the leather harnesses on your animals, and the wooden handles of your tools, desperate for the salt and minerals from the sweat that soak them. A farmer could watch his entire year's work, his entire hope for survival, be consumed in a matter of hours. There was nothing you could do but retreat indoors, listen to the terrifying noise, and pray for it to end. These constant encounters with the smaller, crawlier parts of the natural world were more than just an inconvenience. They were a profound psychological drain. The feeling of being constantly dirty, constantly itchy, constantly invaded, wore you down. The world didn't feel like a place you controlled. It felt like a place you were barely tolerated by. A world that was always trying to reclaim the small space you had carved out for yourself. It's a side of frontier life that is often overlooked in the grand stories of cowboys and homesteaders. Before you could tame the West, you first had to survive the nightly battle with the bugs in your own bed. This is one of the more subtle points that historians who study the daily lives of pioneers emphasize. The sheer creature discomfort of their existence, something that modern humans, with our sealed houses and insecticides, can barely imagine. Tonight, as you lie in your straw bed feeling that familiar itch, you are not a rugged individualist conquering the frontier. You are a host organism, and the night belongs to your countless tiny tenants. The day is finally drawing to a close. The sun has completed its long journey across the vast sky, and the horizon is now a deep, bruised purple. The eternal wind seems to quiet down just a little, as if it too is exhausted. Your work, for the most part, is done. The animals are tended to, the water barrel is full, and the meager supplies from the general store are put away. The physical exhaustion you feel is bone deep. It's not the pleasant tiredness after a good workout. It's a heavy, crushing fatigue that makes every movement a conscious effort. And now your thoughts turn to the final two events of the day: dinner and the gaping void of time that comes after it. Dinner, you will not be surprised to learn, is not a feast of variety. It is a repeat performance of breakfast, with a few minor variations. The centerpiece is, once again, meat that has been preserved in a mountain of salt. It might be the same salt pork, fried to a crisp, or perhaps its cousin, salt beef. It is salty, it is tough, and it is greasy. Accompanying the meat are the familiar staples. There will be beans, almost certainly. Beans were the fuel of the West, cheap, filling, and easy to store. They would be boiled for hours in a pot over the stove until they became a thick, homogeneous sludge. There will be bread, not a light, airy loaf, but a dense, heavy soda bread or biscuits made with your hopefully de-weevilled flour, and you will wash it all down with the same bitter chicory-based coffee you had this morning. It's a meal designed for caloric replacement, not for pleasure. Every dinner is a variation on a theme, and the theme is brown. The family gathers around the rough-hewn table. The room is lit by a single kerosene lamp, which casts a warm but small circle of light, pushing the corners of the room into deep shadow. The lamp hisses softly, a sound that will become the soundtrack to your evenings. Conversation is muted. There isn't the energy for lively debate. The talk is of the day's work, the state of the sick neighbor, the health of the livestock, the worry about your brother's persistent cough. It is a conversation grounded entirely in the harsh realities of survival. There is no idle chatter about movies or television shows, no discussion of sports teams or vacation plans. Your world is small, and the topics of conversation are circumscribed by its immediate pressing needs. After the meal, the dishes are washed in a basin of lukewarm water and wiped with a damp cloth before being put away. And now you face the great empty expanse of the evening. What do you do for the next few hours before sleep finally claims you? You are living in a pre-digital, pre-electronic age. There is no television to binge watch, no internet to surf, no phone to scroll through. Entertainment is a concept that you have to actively create from almost nothing. This is the part of 19th century life that modern minds often find hardest to grasp. The sheer, crushing, monolithic boredom. Your options are starkly limited. Your family might own a Bible and perhaps a few other books like Shakespeare or an almanac. Reading is a possibility, but it's difficult. The light from the single kerosene lamp is poor and flickering, putting a heavy strain on your eyes. After a full day of staring at the bright sun over the prairie, your eyes are already tired. Reading is work, not relaxation. If someone in the family is musical, they might have a fiddle or a harmonica. The lonely, scraping sound of a fiddle playing an old folk tune could fill the small soddy, a welcome but melancholy break in the silence. The music is often sad, a reflection of the hard life from which it springs. Most evenings are filled with simple, repetitive tasks. Your mother or sister will be mending clothes by the faint light, darning socks, patching the knees of work pants. It's a never-ending job. You might be tasked with carving a new handle for a tool, whittling a piece of wood until it is smooth and functional, or perhaps you'll be cleaning the rifle, a methodical and necessary chore. These are not hobbies. They are extensions of the day's labor. It's productivity, not leisure. Historians still debate the true psychological effects of this profound lack of external stimulation. Some argue it fostered a stronger internal life, a greater capacity for reflection and imagination. Others argue it led to a condition known as prairie madness, a form of severe depression or psychosis brought on by the combination of isolation, monotony, and the sensory deprivation of the endless, featureless landscape. Sometimes, for a real treat, you might play a game of checkers or dominoes on a homemade board. The pieces are worn smooth with use. It is a simple, quiet pastime. Card games are also common, though in the home it's less about gambling and more about passing the time. An odd but true fact for this era is the surprisingly widespread popularity of stereoscopes. This was the 19th century version of virtual reality. It was a handheld viewer that held a card with two nearly identical photographs on it. When you looked through the lenses, the two images would merge into a single three-dimensional scene. These cards could transport you for a moment to Niagara Falls or Paris or the pyramids of Egypt. It was a rare and treasured window out of your small brown world. But it was an expensive luxury, one your family likely doesn't have. Mostly, though, you just sit. You sit in the quiet, watching the flickering lamplight, listening to the wind and the soft sounds of your family members breathing. You are too tired to do much else. The sheer physical exhaustion from your day of labor acts as a powerful sedative. Your body craves nothing more than to lie down. There is no fear of missing out, because there is nothing to miss out on. Your world has shrunk to these four dirt walls. Finally, after an hour or two of this quiet, watchful waiting, it's time. There is no set bedtime, but the high price of kerosene for the lamp means you don't burn it for long. Your father extinguishes the flame, and the room is plunged into an absolute, profound darkness. You feel your way to your bunk, the exhaustion of physical weight pushing you down onto the lumpy straw mattress. Dinner was boring. The evening was boring. But now at last comes the promise of rest. You lower your exhausted body onto the straw-filled bunk, a deep groan escaping your lips against your will. For a single fleeting second, the horizontal position is a blessing, a surrender that your screaming muscles have been craving for hours. But the relief is short-lived. The moment your weight settles, the reality of your bed makes itself known. It is not a sanctuary of comfort. It is just another torment, a final, passive obstacle in a day defined by them. Your mattress, a lumpy canvas sack filled with compressed, dusty straw, feels less like a cushion and more like a bag of oddly shaped rocks. The original firm support mattress, you think with a flicker of bitter humor, designed by someone who hated spines. You shift, trying to find a valley between two particularly aggressive lumps of straw. The entire bunk crackles and rustles with every movement, a dry, loud sound that seems to fill the profound silence of the room. You can feel the individual stalks poking through the canvas, 1,000 tiny, insistent needles against your tired skin. The thin wool blanket you pull over yourself offers warmth, but it is a scratchy, suffocating warmth. You recall the itch from this morning and know that you are not alone in this bed. The fleas and mites, your constant companions, are waiting. You are simply their nightly feast laid out on a platter of straw. The fire in the stove has long since died, and the pervasive cold that greeted you this morning is beginning to creep back into the soddy. It seeps through the packed earth walls and nibbles at the edges of your blanket. Your feet are blocks of ice, and you curl into a tight ball, trying to hoard your own body heat. But the physical discomforts of your bed are only the opening act in tonight's performance of restlessness. Now that your body is still, your mind is free to race, replaying the day's anxieties on a loop. The salty pork and beans you had for dinner have left you with a powerful, burning thirst. The communal water barrel is just a few feet away, but the thought of swinging your feet out onto that frigid dirt floor is more than you can bear. So you lie there, parched and uncomfortable. And then the symphony of the night begins. It starts with the sounds inside the room. You can hear the slow, deep breathing of your father in the bunk across from you, the softer, quicker breaths of your mother, and then the sound that tightens a knot in your stomach, your brother's cough. It's a wet, ragged sound that cuts through the quiet, followed by a faint, pained whimper in his sleep. Each cough is a fresh wave of fear. Is he getting worse? Will the fever break? The helplessness you feel is a physical weight on your chest. You lie there listening to your family sleep, a collection of snores, wheezes, and worried mutters from a restless mind. The house itself seems to groan around you. The wood of the roof beams contracts in the cold with a sharp crack. A cascade of loose dirt patters down from the ceiling, a reminder that you are sleeping inside the earth itself. Then come the sounds from outside. The ceaseless wind, a low, mournful howl that never stops, scouring the empty plains. It's the sound of absolute loneliness. A coyote yips in the distance, its call answered by others. A wild, unnerving chorus that speaks of a world that is not yours. A world of predators and prey that continues its dance right outside your flimsy wooden door. Your single cow lows softly, a sound of gentle complaint in the cold. Every noise, no matter how small, is amplified by the darkness and your own frayed nerves. You can't just count sheep to fall asleep. You find yourself counting the acres you still need to plow, the dwindling supply of flour, the days until your debt at the store comes due. The modern idea of a good night's sleep was a luxury you can't even conceive of. An authoritative historical fact is that the first patent for a coiled spring mattress wasn't issued until 1865, and they were expensive, complex items for the urban rich for decades afterward. Your world is one of straw, horsehair, or just a pile of rags on the floor. Historians who studied the psychology of the frontier often debate the true causes of prairie madness. While the profound isolation was a major factor, many argue that chronic sleep deprivation, night after night of restless, uncomfortable, and anxious half-sleep, played a massive, underestimated role in the erosion of mental health. How can you face a day of brutal labor when you haven't had a single moment of true restorative peace? As you lie there, you wish you could open the single greased paper window to let in some fresh air to break the stuffy, human-scented atmosphere of the soddy. But you wouldn't dare. An odd but pervasive belief of the time was that the night air, or miasma, was filled with diseases. It was considered actively dangerous to breathe in, the source of fevers and agues. So you remain sealed in, breathing the same stale air over and over. Sleep does not come as a gentle, welcome visitor. It ambushes you. At some point, the sheer, crushing weight of your physical and mental exhaustion becomes too much to bear. Your racing thoughts begin to blur, the sounds from outside fade into a dull, monotonous drone, and the itching from the bugs becomes just another part of the background discomfort. You don't drift off peacefully. You simply collapse into a shallow, fitful, and dreamless state of unconsciousness. It isn't rest. It is a temporary ceasefire in your daily battle for survival, and it will be over all too soon when the cold once again worms its way into your bones and tells you that a new day of hardship has, against your will, begun. And so your day on the frontier finally, mercifully, comes to an end. We walked with you out of the cold, damp earth of the Saudi this morning, and now we leave you there, collapsed into the shallow refuge of a restless sleep. The memory of the day begins to soften and blur, drifting away now like smoke from a dying fire. The sharp, jarring shock of the cold morning water, the heavy weight of the plow in your hands, the endless, vibrating rattle of the wagon on its rough-hewn path. All of these sensations are fading. The salty taste of your meager dinner, the dry scratch of your woolen clothes, the constant worrying sound of your brother's cough. Let these thoughts recede into the distance. The anxieties that kept you awake, the vast, overwhelming landscape of your worries, are smoothing over now, becoming just whispers in a story that is no longer yours to carry. But for you listening here, the world of hardship dissolves completely. The straw and dirt walls around you melt away, replaced by the familiar comfort of your own room. The lumpy, bug-infested mattress gives way to the softness of your own bed. The sounds that surround you are not the lonely cry of the coyote or the mournful whistle of the wind across an empty prairie, but the gentle, rhythmic hum of a fan, the distant rumble of a passing car, the safe and ordinary quiet of your own home. The darkness holds no terror, only the promise of true, deep, and restorative rest. That frontier soul, a survivor in a world of constant struggle, has finally surrendered to a thin and troubled sleep. And now you can surrender to yours. Allow your own breathing to slow and your thoughts to quieten, feeling the weight of your own body as a comfort and a release.